Dr. Deepika Jindal, our special speaker for the day, and she is a senior manager with medical affairs and scientific affairs for Roche Diagnostics India. So welcome, Dr. Deepika.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the kind introduction. It is my honor to speak to this August gathering, and thank you to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. So let me right away begin with my topic. My topic today is the role of biomarkers in the screening, diagnosis, prediction, and prognostication of preeclampsia. So we know that a physician who is managing preeclampsia is faced with a lot of dilemmas. One thing is the diagnosis of preeclampsia. Often the symptoms and signs are not very clear or overlapping with some comorbidities which the patient has. Sometimes the doctor has the dilemma of continuing the pregnancy as long as possible, but the only cure for the management of preeclampsia is the delivery of the patient. So there is a lot of uncertainty involved with the management of preeclampsia patients, and that is where it becomes imperative that we broaden our view and look at other things which can give more confidence to the clinician and improve the certainty of diagnosis. So far, if we see preeclampsia, the diagnosis of preeclampsia is largely clinical and supported with some laboratory markers, so based on hypertension, proteinuria, and some other signs and symptoms. But as we see, despite the best use of these criteria, the positive predictive value of these criteria is just close to 20%. Also, the prediction may not be as good. So it has been seen that in about 38% of the patients who develop eclamptic seizures, they never have a documented history of hypertension and proteinuria. So that means it becomes important that we move away from just looking at the symptoms and signs and go back into the pathology of the disease and see what can be evaluated there. So to understand about what can be really helpful from the pathology of preeclampsia, let us quickly look at the pathology of preeclampsia first. So the cause of preeclampsia is not very well known. It could be immunological factors, it could be some environmental factors or the genetic factors. We don't really know the cause. But what we do know is that at the center or the heart of preeclampsia lies the placental malimplantation and the placental dysfunction. This is the most important pathology in preeclampsia. This leads to downstream effects and change in the expression of some biomarkers, the angiogenic biomarkers, which then leads to subsequent development of the signs and symptoms like hypertension, proteinuria, eclampsia, and the others. So what is this placental dysfunction? What happens in a normal pregnancy is the spiral artery, it invades into the placenta and it gives blood supply to the placenta. The trophoblasts present in the placenta, they convert into invasive trophoblasts. They invade into the spiral artery. They increase the lumen of the spiral artery. That is how the spiral artery becomes more compliant and the blood flow to the placenta increases, which is very essential for the fetus. However, in a pregnancy which is destined to become preeclamptic, the spiral artery enters into the placenta, but the trophoblasts are not able to convert into the invasive trophoblasts and are not able to invade the spiral artery, because of which the lumen of the spiral artery remains narrow and the blood supply to the placenta remains limited. This leads to ischemia of the placenta and reduced blood supply to the placenta. And this, as I said, so this is the placental malimplantation and dysfunction, and this leads to some subsequent effects. So what happens in a normal pregnancy? Mostly the balance is towards more angiogenesis and more blood supply to the placenta. So there is a vascular endothelial growth factor here, the name of which is placental growth factor. This is a member of the VEGF family. The placental growth factor binds to its receptor, which is VEGF receptor 1, the other name for which is FMS-like tyrosine kinase 1 or FLT1. So PLGF binds to its receptor FLT1. FLT1 is present on various cells, including the endothelial cells, leads to downstream signaling and angiogenesis. However, in a pregnancy where there is placental ischemia, FLT1 is not completely formed. So instead of FLT1, a truncated version of FLT1 is formed, and this truncated version does not have the stem, is not attached to any cell, because of which it is freely moving about in the circulation, and hence it is called as soluble FLT1 or SFLT1. Now, when PLGF binds to SFLT1, there is no downstream signaling, there is no angiogenesis. So this SFLT1, instead of acting as an angiogenic factor, it starts acting as an anti-angiogenic factor because it consumes the PLGF. So in a normal pregnancy, as you see in the graph below, the balance is towards pro-angiogenesis, and in a pregnancy which is at increased risk of preeclampsia, the balance shifts towards anti-angiogenesis, where the SFLT1 value increases and PLGF levels go down. And very, very interestingly, the changes that happen in SFLT1 and PLGF, they happen much before the onset of the signs and symptoms of preeclampsia, as we have already seen in one of the initial slides, that the signs and symptoms are an effect of change of these angiogenic markers. So SFLT1, it starts increasing significantly at least 5 weeks before the onset of preeclampsia, and PLGF starts decreasing 9 to 11 weeks before the onset of preeclampsia. So again, this is important to bear in mind, as we will see later, how this helps to predict what is going to happen in the next 4 to 5 weeks, because the levels of the biomarkers are increasing or decreasing before the onset of preeclampsia. So it is now understood that these, understanding of these biomarkers is very important, because these biomarkers can be put to good use for women who are at risk of preeclampsia. So PLGF can be used in the first trimester of pregnancy between 11 and 14 weeks of gestation to screen women who are at risk of preeclampsia and then subsequently manage them. Whereas the ratio of SFLT1 and PLGF can be used in the second and third trimester of pregnancy, week 20 onwards, and it can be used for multiple things like the diagnosis of preeclampsia, the prediction of preeclampsia, as well as the prediction of adverse outcomes of preeclampsia. And this is what we are going to see in the next few slides. So we start with the importance of PLGF for screening of preeclampsia risk in the first trimester. Now, it has long been known that, through cohort studies and some case reports, that aspirin could potentially be useful for preeclampsia to reduce the risk of preeclampsia. However, the ASPRI trial, the main trial, it was a randomized controlled trial. It was published in 2017, and this RCT clearly showed that aspirin 150 milligram can reduce the risk of preeclampsia significantly, that is by about 62% reduction in the risk of preterm preeclampsia. So this was a very important trial. It clearly established the value of aspirin. Now, aspirin is a very simple therapy, extremely cheap as well. So it's very important that women who really need aspirin, that means who are the women at risk of preeclampsia, do receive the treatment. But it is also important that aspirin is not freely distributed to everybody. So as the experts opine, aspirin is not to be meant for each and every patient because it is cheap and because it is a very safe medicine, but it should be targeted only to those women who need aspirin. So the question arises, how do we identify the women who need aspirin? Let us see how the ASPRI trial did it. So the ASPRI trial identified women who needed aspirin using the FMF screening protocol. So the FMF screening protocol, which included mean arterial pressure, mean uterine artery pulsatility index, and PLGF. And so this slide basically shows how in the ASPRI trial, there was a 62% reduction in the risk of preterm preeclampsia. And for less than 34 weeks, the risk reduction was even higher. So how did FMF arrive at this algorithm? They evaluated a number of things. They looked at maternal factors like age of the mother, weight, history, etc. They looked at biophysical factors like mean arterial pressure, uterine artery pulsatility index, as well as biochemical factors like PLGF and PAPA, and studied the various combinations and ultimately found that it is the combination of three, mean arterial pressure, uterine artery pulsatility index, and PLGF, which gives the best detection rate for detection of preeclampsia. Adding PAPA does not really add much value to this. So just the triple marker would be a good enough marker for screening of preeclampsia. And good enough means it is better than the other criteria which are commonly used. So the green bars that you see here are the NICE criteria, which are purely clinical criteria based on the history of the mother, family history, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, etc. Such 16 to 17 factors. And they at best give a detection rate of 39% for preterm preeclampsia. The light blue bars are the ACOG criteria, They are based on previous preterm delivery because of preeclampsia, and which again detect only 5% of the pregnancies who really need aspirin. Whereas the FMF criteria by far is the best, and it detects 75% of the women who really are going to develop preterm preeclampsia. So very clearly, if the medicine is going to be so simple and the benefit is going to be so high, it becomes very essential that all the women who really can benefit from the aspirin treatment should be detected, and the best means to detect them would be the FMF criteria. However, when a woman is detected as high risk and put on aspirin, often it is felt that, okay, aspirin is going to take care of it, and probably this woman does not need further monitoring. But that's not really true. Aspirin does reduce the risk of preeclampsia. However, even in women who did receive aspirin, quite a lot of them develop preeclampsia subsequently. Also, many women who were screened negative in the first trimester eventually did develop preeclampsia. That means it is very essential that women are mapped throughout pregnancy. Screening is very essential, but even later on, whether it's a woman who is on aspirin or somebody who was screened negative, it is essential that they are mapped and followed up for preeclampsia. And that brings us to the value of the ratio of SFLT1 and PLGF in the second and third trimester of pregnancy. So we will see in the next few slides how the ratio is going to be helpful for the diagnosis of preeclampsia, for the prediction of preeclampsia short term I mean 1 to 4 weeks, and for the prediction of the adverse outcomes of preeclampsia. So for the diagnosis, as I explained, the SFLT1 and PLGF ratio is closely linked to the pathology of preeclampsia, and hence the ratio will rise in preeclampsia, but will not rise in similar looking conditions like gestational hypertension or chronic hypertension. Extremely important in our country when women often present late and do not give a reliable history of any past diseases. So preeclampsia can be differentiated from other conditions with the help of the ratio. As far as the diagnosis of preeclampsia is concerned, the cutoff values were obtained from a case control study, and this is a landmark study, the pivotal study for preeclampsia. It was a study conducted in about 700 women, and the investigators, they came up with two sets of cutoffs. One set of cutoff for the early gestational phase up to 34 weeks, and the second one after 34 weeks till delivery. In both the cases, the rule out cutoff was 33. That means women who had values less than 33, it can be ruled out that these women have preeclampsia right now, and the sensitivity of the test is extremely high, between 95 to 89.6%, depending on the gestational phase. And to rule in preeclampsia, the cutoff values were 85 in the early gestational phase and 110 in the later gestational phase, giving an extremely high specificity of 95.5 to about 100%. That means very less chances of getting a false positive result. So these are the cutoff values which are used for the diagnosis of preeclampsia using the ratio. So not only for the diagnosis, actually the ratio can also help us understand the severity. It's a dynamic marker. More severe is the placental dysfunction, more severe is the preeclampsia, higher will be the level of the biomarkers. So milder will have lesser marker, and severe preeclampsia will have high markers, especially if the levels are extremely high. For example, more than 655 in less than 34 weeks. That means this woman has very severe preeclampsia and she needs delivery in the next 48 hours. So this can really help guide on the severity of the disease as well as the prognosis. So this was about how preeclampsia, the ratio can be used for the diagnosis of preeclampsia, differentiating it from other conditions, and how it can be used to understand the severity of the disease. Now let us see, if a woman does not have preeclampsia, can the ratio be used to predict if this woman will develop preeclampsia in the short term? So the evidence comes from a large study. This study was conducted at 30 study sites in 1,300 patients. It's called as the prognosis study. This study was conducted in women who presented with suspected preeclampsia. So if a woman had suspected preeclampsia, then she was enrolled into the study and the marker test was done. And then this study came up with the cutoff value of 38. So basically, women who have value less than 38, these women will, it can be ruled out that these women will not develop preeclampsia in the next 1 to 4 weeks. So preeclampsia can be ruled out for the next 1 week with a negative predictive value of 99.3%, which means if you have a lady with suspected preeclampsia, value comes out to be this. Out of every 1,000 women who are ruled out, only 7 might develop preeclampsia in the next 1 week. And if the value is more than 38, it means that this woman can develop preeclampsia in the next 4 weeks with a high positive predictive value of 36.7%. That means 1 out of 3 women will develop preeclampsia in the next 1 month if the value of the ratio is more than 38. Again, a very important thing. So this does not only tell you immediately what is happening right now, whether she has preeclampsia, but also tells you what might happen in the next 4 weeks. She will or will she not develop preeclampsia. And this prediction is not only for preeclampsia, it is also applicable to the other adverse outcomes of preeclampsia. So again, this evidence comes from the same prognosis study that I presented earlier with the same cutoff value of 38. Here, they found that not only preeclampsia, but complications of preeclampsia like eclampsia, HELLP syndrome, maternal outcomes like maternal death, or pulmonary edema, or cerebral hemorrhage, or fetal adverse outcomes like respiratory distress syndrome, IUGR, abruption of the placenta, etc. All these can also be predicted with the help of the ratio because it is linked to the placental malimplantation and dysfunction. The negative predictive value for ruling out all these adverse outcomes for the next 1 week is about 98.5%, and the positive predictive value is about 65.5%. So basically, a woman suspected of preeclampsia and you feel that maybe she should be delivered as soon as possible, the ratio can really help guide or put the mind of the clinician and patient at peace that she is unlikely to develop any complications and probably the pregnancy can be continued for a little more time. And I will show how this was put into a study. I will present an Indian study which really shows how all these things were put into real life clinical study. So this was what I spoke about, was the role of the marker in understanding the understanding the effect on the maternal and fetal outcomes. Ratio can also be used to predict the pregnancy outcomes. So very importantly, the gestational duration. We know that it is most important that the pregnancy is continued as long as possible. Iatrogenic preterm deliveries are avoided, especially in our country where the neonatology facilities are quite limited, and delivering a baby preterm puts the baby probably at a greater risk. So this same study showed that values, if a woman has value more than 38, then she has about a 3 times higher risk of imminent delivery. That means delivery in the next 24 hours. The remaining was about 40% shorter. The remaining time to delivery was just about 17 days as compared to 51 days in a woman whose value was less than 38. And overall, very importantly, the preterm birth rate was 71% in women with values more than 38 compared to only 17% in women with values less than 38. Again, a very, very important prognostic information can be derived with the help of the ratio. So we have seen so far how the ratio can be used for diagnosis as well as prediction of preeclampsia and the adverse outcomes. If we talk about the real world practice of all the women who are suspected of having preeclampsia, finally only about 15 to 20% of them actually develop the condition. Of all the women who are hospitalized for preeclampsia, more than 80% of the women probably do not even require the hospitalization. So often, sometimes there is an overdiagnosis leading to preterm deliveries and excessive utilization of resources. And many of times there is underdiagnosis, which leads to women who really need the attention not getting it. So that is why this study was conducted. This is the pre-OS study to see what effect does the use of the ratio have on real life decision making on admission to hospitals. So there were some 118 women and the doctors were asked to decide based on the clinical criteria whether this woman should be hospitalized or should not be hospitalized. After that, the value of the ratios was made available to the doctors, and then they were asked to decide now based on the ratio and the clinical picture, will you hospitalize or will you not hospitalize? It was found that after knowledge of the ratio, about 17% of the decisions of hospitalization were changed. Were they the right decisions? We will ignore the left side. We will look at the right side. In cases where the original decision was not to hospitalize and ultimately based on the ratio the decision was made to hospitalize, more than 50% of these women developed preeclampsia, which needed hospitalization. which means the decision to hospitalize was not an incorrect one. It was not an overdiagnosis. On the other hand, for women where the original decision was to hospitalize and based on the ratio, they were not hospitalized, only 15% of them developed preeclampsia, which is very similar to women who were never to be hospitalized pre or post the availability of the ratio. This shows that not hospitalizing or not upscaling the management based on the ratio does not put the women at greater risk. A very important study which shows the real world impact of the ratio on the clinical decision making. And now I come to a very, very interesting study. Very interesting because this is a study from India. This was this study basically was done to understand the impact of the ratio on the clinical decision making in the outpatient department. So here, women who were having hypertensive pregnancies between 28 to 37 weeks were included into the study. The cutoff values were, as I described earlier, 38, 85, 110, and they were used to group women into three categories: low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk. That means below 38, between 38 and upper cutoff, and above the upper cutoff. If you look at the graph here, the green low risk values, you will see that most of the women who had a green, that means a low risk value, even after repeated measurements, they did not develop a higher ratio. So more than 70% of the women, they never developed a higher ratio, even if they were suspected of preeclampsia. This basically says that women who are suspected of preeclampsia and you're thinking of upscaling the management, if the value is less than 38, then mostly these women can be easily followed up on the OPD basis without any extra care taken for the women, and that will not land the woman into trouble. She will remain to be at low risk for the remainder of the pregnancy. The graph here on the left-hand side shows that based on the ratio, could they predict the development of severe preeclampsia in the next 1 week. So they saw that for all the women where the ratio was less than 33 or 38, none of the women developed severe preeclampsia in the next 1 week. On the other hand, in women where the value was above, in the women who were in the high risk zone, 60% of them developed severe preeclampsia in the next 1 week. So this again clearly shows how if the ratio is added to the clinical practice, it can really guide the doctor in the right direction on what is going to happen very soon. Do I need to upscale the management or I do not need to upscale the management? And also it was seen that in women with the high risk ratio, they had higher NICU admission rates, higher maternal complication rates, and much lesser time to delivery. So the author's conclusion basically was in women who were at low risk and they continued with routine antenatal care for these women. No maternal deaths, no fetal deaths were seen. Very, very few severe preeclampsia was seen, and that too not within the next 1 week of doing the ratio. And so it shows that for 80% of the women will fall into the low risk category, the ones who are suspected of preeclampsia. And here the resources can be really conserved without harming the women. And on the other hand, women with high risk ratio, many of them developed preterm and had NICU admissions. And it can be seen that these women with better management can be managed better. And though the NICU admission rate is higher, no fetal deaths were seen. So that means women, even if they are delivered early, because full care is taken, deaths can be prevented. So this was an important study, as I showed you. So overall, what we have seen so far is two sets of cutoffs. So if the value of the ratio for a woman is less than 38, that means the woman does not have preeclampsia right now. Also, she is not going to develop preeclampsia in the next 1 to 4 weeks. So this is, and 80% of women are going to remain here. For these women, no further management is needed. You do not need to repeat the ratio again and again because mostly she is going to remain low risk. Routine care can be done. Repeated measurement will only be required if there is a fresh suspicion of preeclampsia. In women where the values are more than 85 or more than 110, these are the women who have preeclampsia right now. So it is indicative that this woman has already developed preeclampsia, and then the woman can be managed based on the preeclampsia protocol on fetal well-being test requirement, hospitalization or delivery based on the severity of the disease. In women who fall in the intermediate category, that means between 38 and 85-110, these are the women who do not have preeclampsia right now because they do not meet the rule and criteria. But these are the women who are likely to develop preeclampsia in the next 4 weeks. So that means these are the women where higher, more frequent monitoring of the fetus and the mother might be required. And then as soon as preeclampsia develops, the preeclampsia management protocol can kick in. And this ratio is, there is a lot of evidence supporting the ratio, of course, and based on all the evidence that I just showed, and especially the evidence around ruling out preeclampsia with values less than 38, many guidelines have recommended them. Very interestingly, NICE, these are the guidelines from UK, which consider not only the clinical evidence, but also consider the, economic aspect of using the ratio. They recommend to use the ratio for ruling out preeclampsia. Similarly, other European guidelines like the German, ZEC, and Danish, the German guidelines recommend preeclampsia, the marker, for all the things which I have just explained. Also, interestingly, the European Society of Cardiology, which is the main cardiology body of Europe, and in fact, the cardiologists follow their guidelines for heart failure and myocardial infarction and so on and so forth. In their guidelines for the management of cardiovascular diseases during pregnancy, ESC also recommends the use of the ratio values less than 38 to rule out development of preeclampsia in the next 1 week. And the International Society of Ultrasound and Obs and Gynaes, it recommends that the use of the FMF algorithm, so the use of the maternal factors MAP, UTPI, and PLGF between 11 to 13 weeks appears to be the most efficient screening model for identification of women at risk of preeclampsia. So even the screening model used, which is based on PLGF, has been recommended by the International Society of Ultrasound and Obs and Gynae. So this was about all the evidence that I have and the interpretation of the evidence on the use of PLGF in the first trimester of pregnancy and the use of the ratio in the second, third, and third trimester of pregnancy, and also the importance of mapping the woman throughout the pregnancy and being alert for development of preeclampsia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Deepika Jindal.